Welcome to Making Sense of Alzheimer's. I'm editor Terry Casey, and I'm here today with Sky on Swings librettist Hannah Moskovich and Penn Memory Center co-director Dr. Jason Karlowish. Thanks for being here today.
I got invited into writing opera by Len Beecher, who is the composer on Sky on Swings. And I've only written 3 operas, and they're all with him. And that's my whole opera career.
Was this your first opera that the topic was something, if you will, medical?
100%. Yeah.
What was it like when you got the word we're going to do an opera about a woman with Alzheimer's disease?
I don't know if I told you this, and I mean this will horrify you. It will horrify you. My first reaction was, "Oh no, is it going to be a lot of people in white coats? Is that your idea, Lembeat? Because I'm going to be bad at that." Mm-hmm. Partly because, I should say structurally, reporters and doctors are sometimes devices that writers rely upon to get out exposition. Mm-hmm. And so I worry about using doctors and reporters in particular as characters unless they have personal lives and stakes in the story.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So my first thought was, Lembeat is trying to get me to write a bad opera with him.
Yeah, and a bunch of doctors disposing upon amyloid plaques and whatnot. And,
So my first reaction was like, well, Lembeat, I'll do it because it's you, but I don't like it.
Yeah, but then what made you like it?
Well, so then we had a workshop. Joanna Settle, the director, and Lembeat and I, they actually came up here to Nova Scotia to hang out with me. And we spent a couple of days talking about what we thought the opera could be. And then I thought, okay, it's going to be good, because there was an interest in speaking about the subjectivity of the experience of Alzheimer's. So from the point of view of people who have it, which opens up the possibility of creating a potentially surreal or fantastical world. Mm-hmm. And that was more of interest to me because it felt like a place where fiction could go. But then we also spent that time trying to, at least have a layman's understanding of the biology of Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we weren't just total rubes,
Yeah.
Which is often what writers are. Like, there's a tendency to under-research, which is why it's so valuable to have expert consultants come in and tell us what we're doing badly.
Yeah.
Just usually a lot.
Yeah, I'm curious, what were some of the things that you started with? So you all met in Nova Scotia and had these great ideas about, we're going to tell the subjectivity experience of a person. Did you decide at that point it was going to be a woman, by the way?
We did. We thought that that there would be value to it being a love story, and that it being a love story between 2 women who both were at different stages of the development of their disease.
Right.
And that they would fall in love, but we wouldn't be sure if it was Alzheimer's or love.
So I'm going to bracket the gender issue around the love, but why didn't, well, let's go there actually. So why did you say it's going to be a woman and then another woman? Why didn't you pick a man and another man, or a man and a woman?
Good question. Now I have to think back to that, like what that decision was. Well, I think we were partly influenced, and this is perhaps not commendable, but we were partly influenced by the potential for it to be original, because in opera there's so much heterosexual love. Like, that's all opera more or less is. It's just a tenor falls in love with a soprano and a bass gets angry about it. That's like the whole canon, right? Yeah. So I think we thought, and we all came with personal reasons. My sister's gay and married to her wife, and I care a lot about her. And she talks a lot about who lesbians tend to be in stories, and they're usually the villains, and they're usually serial killers. And so I'm always sort of engaged in showing love between women when it's not actually the primary focus. So I'm always interested in that. So this was like a perfect example, but I think that a perfect possibility for that. But I think also Joanna said it, because she was like, she swears a lot too. And she was like, tired of the heterosexuality of the canon.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Yeah. No, interesting. So you all started out in Nova Scotia with this idea of the subjectivity of the experience is going to be the focus. And then, started writing, started researching. And then eventually you came to Philadelphia, which is where we met,
Yeah.
and continued on from there. I think when we met, you had about another probably 9 months to go before it was going to premiere. So you had still had a bit of time. I was just curious, along the way, how did your kind of idea of what should be the elements of the narrative change? In other words, not so much what was true or false, but what were some of the assumptions you had, or they said, no, actually, we're not going to do that. We're going to have her do this instead. Like that's a more true picture of the disease. But I'm just curious, what were some of those changes?
Well, I can speak specifically to the point where you came into the project, probably.
Oh.
Yeah, and in fact, I'd like to just make sure that we take that in a couple of parts. I know you two had a couple of conversations separately leading up to the discussion with the creative team. So if you could just tell me a little bit about how you two had gotten connected. First of all, some of the discussions that you had reviewing the opera, and then leading up to and including Jason's visit to the creative team.
Sure. Well, I'll speak to how I got connected. I just got an email one day from someone from the opera that said, we're doing this opera. I think even then the title was Sky on Swings, about Alzheimer's. Would you be available to talk? It was as simple an email as that. And I'm like, sure, it sounds great. It was the first time, and I hope it's not the last, that I got asked to consult on an opera about Alzheimer's. But I knew right away, that's a great topic for opera, as opposed to a play or plays, opera. And I thought, what a perfect opera topic. So I said yes right away. And then, a couple weeks later, pedaled down to your to the Philadelphia opera down on Broad Street or so. That was how we met.
Yeah. Well, and we were, it was sort of magical. I got told that, one of the eminent, people out there who knows about Alzheimer's was going to be available to us. And for me, I'm always like, well, that's magic, first of all. So it felt like Opera Philadelphia magic that somehow. Yeah. And then, for us, like we're always, I mean, it's always like daunting to have somebody who actually knows anything come in because, we've been Googling things, which is, so we have like Wikipedia level knowledge. So we think we know what we're doing to some degree, and you've made whatever efforts to watch, to talk to, so there's like the anecdotal route. So I've talked to people whose parents have had Alzheimer's or who has husbands or wives have had it. And I've watched some documentaries and read some novels, and that's the limit, right? And I've tried to get a handle on the biology, but to actually have someone there who has, expert knowledge and who has, who is a veteran at dealing with the disease, that's something different. So a bunch of things got said by you, which were super useful. For instance, you talked about, I think we had references to the chorus being like zombies at that point. And what I heard you say was, that's always how Alzheimer's people get spoken about. I thought I had made that up. Like I didn't know anybody had ever referred to Alzheimer's patients as being like zombies. I had and I thought I was brilliant, or at least I thought, if this had a horror genre to it, it would be zombies, because there were so many zombies out there, zombie stories circulating, and I was like, oh, you know what this reminds me of? Anyway, so hearing you say that, I was like, oh, wow, like I did not know that wasn't, wholly original. So that was super useful. So then we took that out. And then we also, I think, there were more specific, more technical things that you said that were helpful, like the the kind of hallucinations that we had in the early scenes. And, you know, we had a character who was seeing strangers, and you talked to us about how they wouldn't actually hallucinate a full person, but they might mistake one person for another.
Yeah.
And that made sense. I thought, oh, right, okay, I get that. That makes sense of like what it would technically be like, or you know, for someone with the level of experience you had with people with Alzheimer's, that's what you typically see. So that was helpful too, and so we made changes based on that as well. And I think there were a number of things you said that were like that. I mean, it's very technical, right? But
yeah, it was certainly, I guess, quote, technical. That is to say, you know, what's there for every patient with Alzheimer's, there's a unique story about the disease, and we probably could go find someone who fit the story you had. But it's interesting. It was trying to like, what's the normative story of Alzheimer's, so that you're not letting an extreme drive the narrative, and therefore, you know, because whatever narrative you tell will become normative. You know, it'll become, oh, that everyone watches, oh, that's Alzheimer's being depicted. So the tension I felt as I remember reading the libretto was, you know, I remember, for example, you had her pull a knife out and go after her daughter.
mm-hmm.
I went after that with a knife. And I have had patients who have gotten violent, but to the level of pulling knives out or guns. I mean, it's happened. I've had patients. I haven't had a patient use a gun, but but it's not the norm, you know. And I felt as I read that if you make that happen, then that tells a story that patients with Alzheimer's are violent to the point of drawing knives and going after people as a result of hallucinations.
Right.
Like that exists, but that's like letting the 0.05% become the median. And I kind of felt that now here I'm being directive, like, no pun intended for your field, but you know, the responsibility of art is to recognize that what you say will have a lot of implications. And I really felt like I didn't want to see a drama about Alzheimer's that opens and features a woman having vivid hallucinations that drive her to near homicidal behavior. Like, that's just what the public would want, right? It confirms their worst fears, you know, but then you lose what really you wanted to tell, which was what's the experience of being human with the disease, not being a monster with the disease.
That's all so articulate. And it is true, I think that, I mean, obviously it is, but it's like such a beautiful articulation for me as a writer of like, you know, there are pitfalls to being a writer. I mean, the atypical stories tend to drive most of writing. But no, I mean, I think like in this case, I wasn't even aware of what was typical versus atypical necessarily, right? So, and I think actually in the case of Alzheimer's, the experience of it is extreme enough that you do not need to go towards the atypical or to put out anything that is, you know, misconstruing the disease, and that might actually do a public's disservice. But, and so I don't know if you, I mean, obviously you're aware, so we took that to heart and I took that out.
I know, I remember seeing the premiere, like, life is gone, Terry. I said,
but that is, you know, the great advantage of having you come in is that then you can speak to us about what you know, which is a great deal more than what we know about the actual disease.
Yeah.
So it's always daunting when the expert consultant comes in, because you're like, I'm gonna have to rewrite things. But I think it's a great, you know, 9 months out, you know, I think the worst for me, a worst case scenario is to hear that on opening night. So
yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, it's like an editor, I guess. There's writers and there's editors, and there's truly a difference between the two. Although I don't think of myself as an editor of your piece.
Well, that is absolutely like, you know, I mean, you know, having worked on, I worked on military shows, and I had expert consultants come in who did tours in Panjwai, Afghanistan. You know, I worked on a show about theoretical physics, and we had a guy from the Perimeter Institute who was a theoretical physicist. I mean, we need it, because otherwise, and my parents are social scientists, so I feel a very strong atavistic desire to research properly when I can. I think I'm probably, it's unusual. Writers are like, whatever. A lot of time. And then if I'm up against deadline and there's a real shoot schedule, I will be like that too. I'll be like,
Yeah.
everything kind of goes out the window. You're just like, get something we have to shoot it, make a movie. But if I have the time, I'm so delighted to be able to like not put out, like not get it wrong, like just obviously wrong.
And that certainly helps in terms of the writing. But that meeting down in Opera Philadelphia was with the whole cast, and it was really enjoyable to see them share their personal stories, and reflect upon both the feedback and your explanation of some of your writing. What kind of conversations do you remember having with the cast? Did any of them reflect upon that discussion as well? In addition to these changes in the writing, do you remember any changes being made and sort of how the disease was being portrayed by the actors?
Yeah, because I remember you spoke a little bit about like what the physicality was of Alzheimer's, and that I know impacted choices that the performers were making around how they were going to physically portray those characters. That's my memory. I was awfully focused on myself, clearly. I was trying to take good notes on what had happened. But I do remember that a lot of your insights into how people who have the disease move and function in space were, listened to really carefully by all of the performers.
Yeah. It's interesting how your story, you had to have, but you got family there. And their suffering was there. I mean, there's the scene when the daughter of the one patient and the son of the other meet in I think the TV room or something of the place, the facility, and they have their moment. And it's actually there. It's vaguely I don't want to say romantic, but it could be standard, romance. But you bat it away like it's not gonna. They're actually very sad characters. They're the two of them, but they're not foregrounded. They don't drive at all the narrative. The scenes with them, I don't mean to be critical, but you could have cut them out, and it still would have worked. I think. I'm curious why you even had them in there.
Well, I think so it's so interesting, right? Like part of when I looked at the body of like the literature and fiction and about Alzheimer's, like what's out there that I could find, a lot of it focuses on the family members of the people with Alzheimer's, and that makes sense, right? Because their experiences, those are people who share a reality, and so focusing on them and their grief, which is often extreme, makes sense in terms of what I know about how to tell stories. But because of that it felt to us like sidelining or marginalizing that experience was more interesting, and foregrounding the experience of the people who had Alzheimer's was more interesting or more original or less part of what fiction tends to address. And so I think that's partly why like that was a consideration for us, that so much of literature, anything, any story around Alzheimer's foregrounds relatives, which, and we just felt like, what about?
And ask them what it was like. It's hard at the end to ask the patient, well, what was this all like? Because A, by then many of them can't really tell you, and B, or they're dead. So you took a lot of risks there, actually.
We did.
Yeah. In that scene though, where the two adult children are together, I remember there's a audio track of contemporary news reportage from America. Mostly, I think it was, like the budget agreements and whatnot. And this might not have been your doing, but I'm curious, could you give any insight about what the logic of how was that moving the narrative along, or what was the thought around having the cacophony of news reporting going on? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, that is, that's sort of not my department, but I can speak to it. I can tell you why Joanna made that choice directorially. I think, they were interested because we sort of had those scenes partly there, like part of what we were up to was trying to, because we were sort of taking off into a bit more of a surreal world with the women who were at the center of the story, then we wanted scenes that were going to ground it in a real kind of like gritty reality that would counterpoint for us. And that scene, like the idea of like just budgets, I know it was her idea of counterpointing, so that like suddenly we're crashed into like a waiting room and there's just crappy budgets. Originally they were trying to get clips from The View, actually. They wanted The View, but didn't get that because it was $1 million. So they got budgets because they thought they wanted just something that was just like this sort of stark, like fluorescently lit reality that was the opposite of what was going on in the other story.
Interesting. Yeah. Very interesting. You've been using the word surreal a lot. I'm curious, when did that enter into the conversation about this as a way to organize what this was about?
Well, and like, here's where we took a real imaginative leap, and we weren't sure how people would feel about it, honestly. But because the interiority of the experience of Alzheimer's, it's hard to know, right? Like, or so it seems like we can look at the exterior behavior of people who have Alzheimer's and try and like make some guesses, but in a weird way, it's a place fiction can go, which is like, what is going on? And I think that the world we imagined was surreal in the true sense, like dreamlike.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a short story by another great Canadian writer, Alice Munro.
Oh, I know which one. Yeah.
Called Inside of the Lake.
Yeah.
You know that one?
It's brilliant. Yeah.
I teach that story, and I always emphasize to the students, you've got to read this in one sitting. You sit down and budget the 35 minutes it'll take from beginning to end, because that reminded me of your piece, or your piece reminds me of it, which is the experience of, I forget her name in the story, but entering into this world of a kid going backwards on a bicycle, in a garden, unsure of what it is, a broken clock that's right 2 times. There's a whole host of scenes in that, and the general imagery of Inside of the Lake is surreality. And I think Munro got it just right, like you guys did. You could either try to make it weirdly real in a comic sense, then, or you can make it a horror story, unreal, scary, or you can do what I think is the right space, which is this above reality, beyond reality, or surreality. And I think you guys got it with that. Yeah.
That's kind of you. Yeah, I love Alice Munro, and obviously she's influenced me a huge amount. She's,
Yeah, it's interesting how much her stories are about aging, particularly aging women. It's actually almost an organizing theme of her work, which is time and the passage of time and how it affects lives. And certainly aging, it features there. There's a couple of her stories where someone's got cognitive problems. The Bear Came Over the Mountain, the other one, of course.
Yeah. She's got a few.
Yeah.
She really she goes right for and sort of hunts down the experience of Alzheimer's for all of those involved.
Yeah. Back to the conversation we had also about the romance between them. I thought, as I watched it and read the libretto, I thought it was really interesting that was presented as a matter of fact and not as a problem. Because in clinical practice, of course, that often is a big problem. Like, we don't want them to be a couple, or is this acceptable, or should we tell the children? And I mean, you could have had the whole thing be about the acceptability of their relationship, and you could have run the narrative that way if you wanted, and made a drama. Yeah, like back in Madame Butterfly, this Japanese prince shows up and is protesting and wants to marry Madame Butterfly, and whatnot, instead of why are you hooked up with the American naval officer who's basically jilted you. But you didn't have a prince, if you will, show up and protest the relationship and whatnot. Instead, I thought it was interesting. You just let it happen, and it was part of the story, and it wasn't part of the problem. And in that sense, I think that what you did was something that kind of provoked the audience, because the standard would have been to have the daughter march in and say, "My mother would never have hooked up with another woman. This is insulting. Or there's actually a husband at home if he knew about that." You know what I'm trying to say? You could have thrown that in, and you didn't do it. And I think I think that actually, by what didn't happen more so than what happened, really reaffirmed that they're adults making choices, and this is the current choice they've made about a romantic relationship. And so I thought that worked very well, for what you didn't do more so than what you did.
Oh, well, thank you. And on a structural level, I mean, Alzheimer's was the antagonist.
Yeah.
So we didn't need any other source of antagonism from family. But again, I think also it was our interest to just have that be a part of the story, and feeling like we may culturally be at the moment where that's possible, we hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can tell that story without that being foregrounded.
Yeah. Again, in the hands of, I think, a more cliched writer, you would have had the daughter come in angry about the relationship, or the son, and had a little brouhaha about that and whatnot. And that satisfied a certain crowd and whatnot. But you didn't do that. I thought that was really good. Worked well.
Well, I'm trying to write things that my sister likes. I just try and make her happy.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think also maybe it is possible too that I know I do know what I'm doing. I was going to say, maybe it's just really normative now and we're all used to it, but I actually think I did know what I was doing there, and I was consciously, I knew I was up to something with not emphasizing it.
Yeah. Well, from the Alzheimer's world, the story of someone who's in an institution, excuse the phrase, but it's to emphasize the authority of others, and they're caring for them. That is a big issue when residents start to pair up, and staff have all sorts of strong opinions about what's right and wrong. And you hear stories of family members who are furious. "Why didn't you tell me? How could you let that happen?" Etc. And you made some choices, whether they were implicit or explicit, but you couldn't not make a statement by what you did, and I thought it was very well done.
Well,
it was the right statement.
Thank you also for all of your help. I think it must be a strange thing to walk into a room full of weird opera creatures like we are, and
we do it all the time here.
But thank you. We really, you hope for that. You really hope that you have someone come in like you did and help us to make it better. So that's like the best case scenario. So
do another one.
Really ideal. So thank you for that, and for the help, because we needed it. So.